We're here with Bob Dechant. He's the Chief of Sales, Marketing, and Client Services at Qualfon, a really interesting global provider. And one of the neat things about Bob is through his experience with Stream and now Qualfon, somewhere around 20 years in this space of Nearshore. And what we want to really talk today about, Bob, is some of the real turning points in this industry. Obviously, where we are today results from a number of years of maturation and acceleration. Going back, 10, 20 years, how have things changed? How significant has Nearshore become?
That's a great question. And how I look at it is probably the first evolution of Nearshore was going to Canada. And all the US companies moved heavily into Canada when the dollar was, 62 cents to the dollar, the Canadian dollar. And so you were able to get a great value play in Canada. That changed significantly. And so over the years, things first moved to India when you think of, kind of the labor arbitrage play and all. And but that didn't work, as we all know, and so there's been a lot of rebalancing of where the workload needs to be. And, the Philippines is a very viable play and a competitive play. That's now led to, we need more portfolio protection. We need, protection from currency. We need protection from disasters, typhoons, et cetera. That has led to, in my view, that's led to an explosive growth in Nearshore. And so, it's been an evolution over 20 years, but now clearly it's kind of thinking down, in the Caribbean, Latin America, and, all the way down.
So in those early days, maybe 10, 15 years ago, was the common perception, how much English is there really in Latin America? And what sort of discoveries did you make, were you with Stream at that time? How did you identify some of these key markets?
Great question. And I think the markets many years ago probably had not had the education system to really develop the appropriate English skills 20 some odd years ago. And also the markets, the countries had, I'd say, political unrest. And so when you think of places like El Salvador and Nicaragua, what they were in the 80s and early 90s, they're not as really, kind of peaceful places as they are now to do business in. And I think the investments that the countries have made around education has now led to a much better ability to be really effective in the BPO space, number one. But there's always been this affinity in the Nearshore to the US. And I think that's probably the number one key of success of why it's such an explosive and powerful market is in the world of delivering world-class customer experience, you really need to have a good appreciation for the caller, the customer on the other end of the line. And I believe just the proximity, and there's been so much, I guess what I would say is from the countries in the Nearshore, so many family members, so many people that they know that have gone to the States, lived in the States, moved back after they've been successful, made some money, gone back home. And so it really has brought a tight bond, kind of to this, I guess what I would call a vertically integrated Americas, north and south.
One of the things I always think is kind of curious to ponder is in the history of Nearshore, especially the last 10 years, has it been driven by external forces? In other words, disappointment with India or clients willing to try something else, or how much has it been driven by the promotion efforts, the word of mouth coming out of the region that, hey, this is an attractive place?
I think the number one driver is what I would say is sophistication and maturation of the outsourcing world. And by that I mean, years ago, people had no hesitancy to going deep into one market, maybe even going into one provider and being 80% of that provider's business. And that's a dangerous position because if that company hiccups, you could put a business entirely in jeopardy. And so as the industry has matured, decision makers from the client side have really looked at risk mitigation. And so I don't think it's so much by necessarily external events, but more of the inherent, how do you mitigate risk? And when you mitigate risk, you look at, and there's still a very, appropriate place for where India fits into the value chain, but Philippines serves a place. But, the concerns today are, job saturation, inflation, and and if you look at the Philippine market over the next 3 years, it could be, the supply and demand curve could be upside down, and so the the buyers becoming very mature, I think, is a real driver to them saying, we need an and we need not as a shut down these businesses, but we need an and. We're growing, and we need to add to the portfolio, primarily to mitigate the risk. What they have found is the overall cost of support in Latin America, even though the labor rates may be a hair higher, from a manageability, from an infrastructure, from a, sending my management team 2 weeks to the Philippines, that's a grind on them, and it's a very costly proposition as well. So from a total cost standpoint, I believe Nearshore, CALA, Latin America, LATAM really is competitive in that standpoint, where even, the billable rates may be a little bit higher, but the total cost is better.
Is it safe to say the chief customer officers, the head of customer care, a lot of these individuals, are they more fluent or more knowledgeable about LATAM and CALA now, or are you still seeing a lot of people asking, frankly, some of the more basic questions?
So that's a really good question, and I think the answer to that is, I look at the Latin America marketplace as you have your mature marketplaces in there, and those would be the Dominican Republics and the Costa Ricas and the Mexicos. I think the chief customer officer, give that title, they're very aware across the industry about many of those markets. In Nearshore, though, there's been the evolution of the next set of markets. And who are those? Those are the El Salvadors all the way to the Bogotas, the Barranquillas, Uruguays, Guatemalas. And I believe that the fully understanding of those markets is, we're still in a learning curve as an industry. Certainly some organizations are very well skilled. They've been operating in a lot of those businesses, but I think on whole, there's still a lot to be, kind of a lot to learn about, where those markets are. I think you yourself wrote some pretty good articles that reflected, the diligence needed to be done in each respective market to be sure you're being strategic about that decision. So
interesting. Tell me a little bit about Qualfon's commitment to LATAM. Obviously, you've got very exciting things going on in Guyana, which maybe you could tell us a little bit about that. But
sure.
How significant is LATAM to Qualfon's future?
It's very, very significant, to us. Our roots as a company have been a LATAM-centric company, and now we're becoming a very strong global player, in particular for servicing U.S. multinationals. Our belief is as follows. We have a great footprint in Mexico. I think with President Nieto in power, Mexico is now coming back as a very powerful market, BPO and ITO and supply chain. And many companies are worried about China this day, and a lot of that work is coming back. And so we believe there's going to be explosive growth in Mexico, where over the last probably 5 to 8 years, a lot of that companies have moved away from Mexico. But I think with the support from President Nieto, you're going to see that market really become strong, and we're a major player. That market, we're winning for U.S. multinationals, supporting as a LATAM hub, supporting them in their high growth regions, down in South America and such, and Central America, as well as alternatives for bilingual out of the States. Beyond that, though, we're in Costa Rica, but Costa Rica is a challenged market from the inflation, and and a lot of companies are are reevaluating Costa Rica. We believe there's a place for that in higher end work. So the consumer work I think it may have run its course a little bit in Costa Rica from a cost standpoint, and that enables it to kind of move up the stack, if you will. But then, one of the biggest challenges I see in LATAM is getting access to really good English-speaking folks. Typically in the markets that you're there, English is a foreign language, as they say. All the testing test around English as a foreign language and how good are you. And we have this little diamond in the rough called Guyana, which is the only English-speaking country in South America that is highly literate, 97% literate, as you heard from the president earlier today. And we've been operating there for 8 years, and today we have scale and sustainability, and from a cooperative government, and with an infrastructure that has really enhanced itself over the last couple of years.
It almost sounds to me like it's a classic example of, if you're at the early days, it might have been perceived as quite risky, but Qualfon went in, early entrant, got established really good relations with government,
right.
Employer of choice, and obviously maybe to end on this about the employee issue. Something I've learned is incredibly important at Qualfon. We hear it a lot throughout the industry, but maybe just give us a little snapshot as to your treatment and way you engage people and hire them and take care of them.
Sure, and so that is probably the thesis of the company, is how we impact our people. And you'll hear many companies out there talking about employer of choice. We want to be employer of choice, and here's what we do. And for the most part, companies do what I call kind of good company hygiene, good place to work, good cubes, competent, competitive pay rates and things like that, and some career development. And more often than not, when you go to those centers, you'll see those centers are running with 100% attrition and plus. And we're in the people business. These, all of us are. It's in the people business, and that's our asset. And it makes it extremely difficult to operate when you're operating at 100% attrition. And what Qualfon does is doesn't engineer it from us to the agent or the employee. It really looks at it very differently and says, look at it from the agent backwards and understand what's important to that agent. Mm-hmm. The good company hygiene is important. A good job is important. Competitive, pay and career development, that's important. But that's only half the important in their lives. The other piece that's really important in their lives, and can expand on this for hours, but is their family, the communities that they live in. Many of these markets, their faith is deeply important. And so Qualfon takes a holistic view of its people and doesn't just look at how it can impact them in the work environment, but how can it impact them holistically, including all of those other areas. So the things that we do that I think you won't find from our competitors in the marketplace are reaching out and touching the families, the communities, reaching out around their health, the health of the employee, but the health of the family, and positively impacting those. And that's really the mission of the company, is if we can do that, that positions us best to make an impact in this world. We make an impact in the world and the people, and the derivative of that is you have a great and a completely engaged employee that does what? Delivers a world-class customer experience. So it's a very unique model. It's a brilliantly simple model, and it's a model that works. And our proof points are our attrition rates, or I should say our retention rates are in the upper 90s. I mean, it's and it allows us to deliver sustainable results, which I think is the challenge of this industry.
Very good. Well, thanks for enlightening me. I continue to look forward to getting to know Qualfon. I'll be down in Guyana soon to see it firsthand.
We'll look forward to it. And we'll have a good glass of El Dorado rum.
Sounds good. I'll be up for that.
Good.
Thanks again, Bob.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.